In this video, I'm going to be talking about my hands-on impressions with Fellowship, which is a new game that was announced 12 days ago. This game is considered a MODA, or a multiplayer online dungeon adventure, that takes inspiration from MOBAs and MMOs, and the concept of the game is to provide that endgame dungeon crawling experience that MMOs are known for, and really get that team-based coordination that MOBAs and MMOs have, and let players play that from the very beginning, instead of having to trudge through 50 hours of a campaign of an MMO to get to that part of the game that a lot of people love. This game is being developed by Chief Rebel, which is a Swedish studio, and I got to play with the CEO of that studio, Axel Lindberg, and a couple members of his team. This is being published by Arc Games, which make a lot of games you might be familiar with. They also publish Remnant, they publish Torchlight, two games that you've probably seen on our channel before. So let me get into what Fellowship is a little bit before I kind of get into the pros and cons of this game. Fellowship is a 4-player co-op dungeon crawling experience. You will log into a game server with your character and you'll use a group finder, or you'll invite your friends and you'll play together through various adventures and dungeons and raids. Adventures are more of a short-term dungeon crawling experience. They are one boss with some trash or ads leading up to a boss, and are meant to be done in 10 to 15 minutes. And then there are proper dungeons that are 3 to 5 bosses that take 30 to 45 minutes that you would find in typical MMOs. And the reason they have different types there is for the time constraints available to you. This game is very much designed for players that used to play MMOs that would have a dungeon group or a raid group, and then they grew up, got married, had kids, etc., or simply just don't have the time that they used to have to sink into that. And so they've created the option with the adventures in order to just allow you to play when you only have a little bit of time, and then maybe you get into the dungeons when you have more, and etc. And one thing that I really love too is that they have raids. I don't know exactly how many players will be in the raids. When I asked them about this, it sounded like this was still up for debate internally, just exactly how many raids they would have or how many people would be in raids. But we do know that there are going to be weekly raid locks, which is something that's quite old school. If you played old MMOs, you know what raid locks are. And if you're not familiar, raid locks are when that raid will reset every week. So raids typically have, 3 to 5 bosses or something, and they're usually very difficult. And so what would happen in the old days is that, it might take you 4 days to beat one boss. And then because the raid was raid locked, you had the other 3 days to work on the next boss. That boss would stay dead until the weekly raid lock reset, at which point you'd have to defeat that boss again. The idea being that you could learn the mechanics of the raid slowly over weeks and weeks as you progressed, and it gave you the opportunity to not have to keep killing that first raid boss every time you wanted to try the second raid boss, and to focus on the second boss raid mechanics and the third boss, and so on. I really love that this is going to be part of the game, and it is a kind of an old school mechanic that you don't see in a lot of modern MMOs. Now, moving on to the next point, which is kind of controversial, and if you head over to the Fellowship trailer announcement on their channel, you'll see a lot of comments about this. But the game is hero-based. They are targeting to have 9 or so heroes available at launch, and these heroes will fall into one of 3 roles. They'll either be a healer, tank, or DPS. And each dungeon is supposed to theoretically have 1 healer, 1 tank, and 2 DPS. If you're familiar with MMOs, that shouldn't be a strange concept to you. You can obviously mix this up and play with 2 tanks, which I did a little bit in my play session just on accident, and it went fine. But ideally, you'd have a healer, a tank, and 2 DPS, so you're going to pick characters from those roles and group up using the group finder of the game. Now, a lot of people are commenting that, there's no character creator, there's no class selection, you just pick your hero, and your hero has its own unique abilities, it has its own equipment, it has its own talent tree. So whatever hero you're playing, your gameplay is going to be based off that hero, and I think this is where the game takes inspiration from MOBAs. MOBAs are very much hero-based, and this game is also hero-based. So it's kind of a mixed bag. I mean, the fact that you don't have the freedom to make your own character is a big negative for a lot of people, because not everyone wants to be the same hero running around and look just like the other people in the game. I do know that they plan to have some sort of cosmetics in the game. I don't know if that's going to be monetized or not exactly, but there should be ways to change your appearance beyond the equipment that you're wearing. But if you're somebody who doesn't mind that, who just enjoys the gameplay loop, then this shouldn't be a huge problem for you. And it's my knowledge there's going to be adding more heroes post-launch, so there should be more and more heroes as time goes on. Now, the business model of this game, as far as I know, is buy to play. When I asked them about it, they said it's a buy to play model. You'll pay to buy the game, and then you'll be able to use all the content available in the game. All the heroes will be available to you. All the dungeons, adventures, and raids will be open to you. And again, they said there might be like cosmetic microtransactions in the store to give you skins and things like that. They did not elaborate too much on this. I have a feeling that based on the conversation I had with them, they're still kind of trying to figure out what their post-launch business model is going to be, because they don't have a subscription, because it's not free to play, where everything is microtransactions. You know, as they develop more content for the game, more adventures, more dungeons, more raids, more heroes, they obviously are going to want to monetize that, and they haven't quite figured out how they're going to do that. I don't know if they're going to like release expansions, or if they're going to have like small updates that you can purchase, or what that's going to be. That is still up for debate. This game is currently in alpha development and is scheduled to release sometime next year. So there's still a lot of time to go in terms of decisions to make there. So the general gameplay loop of this game is that you group up with your friends or strangers using the dungeon finder mechanic, and then you go into dungeon after dungeon and you complete the bosses, learning their mechanics, defeating them, defeating the enemies, and then getting loot that's better for you depending on modifiers you add to these dungeons and what difficulty you set that dungeon to. Obviously, the higher difficulty and the more negative modifiers you add to the dungeon, the better the gear that you're going to get. There's going to be set bonuses. You're going to be able to upgrade that equipment that you get with crafting materials. So it's supposed to have a gameplay loop where you just keep grinding dungeons for loot and gear and you get stronger, being able to do harder content, cranking up the difficulty to get better gear, and kind of repeating that. So if you really like the endgame loop of MMOs, the idea is to kind of mimic that. And I will say that I had about an hour-long play session with Axel and the developers, and I had a ton of fun playing. I was a bit rusty. I haven't played kind of an old-school MMO in a long time, and it took me a little bit to get used to it, but once I did, I fell right back into it, and it reminded me why I loved dungeons and why I loved raiding in MMOs. It had the same feeling. It had the same rewarding feeling. And it's not easy. This is not a casual player's MMO. This is absolutely for people who like to spend time learning the mechanics of dungeons, learning the mechanics of trials. You could see that enemies had interrupts that you had to bash them at the right time. Bosses had mechanics where you had to move accordingly or you would wipe. There were a lot of, I wouldn't say advanced mechanics, but certainly more advanced than you see in modern day MMOs, with a throwback to the things that made dungeons and raids really fun in the past, where you would spend a couple of days learning a boss because everybody in the group had to get it right. It's not like one player can just carry the whole team and everyone succeeds. It's like that one player messes up and the whole team wipes. So there was a lot of communication on the comms about, okay, I'm getting this guy and I'll get the interrupt on that guy and you handle this guy. And I really miss that team-oriented PvE experience that we used to have in days gone by that you don't really see so much anymore, or that those games are really dated now, or simply we just don't have the time that we once had to go level a character all the way up to end level, or keep updating it with each expansion that comes out and grinding the gear up to keep doing the content. And if you look at the art style of the game, kind of reminds me of Dauntless, if you're familiar with that game. That is a Monster Hunter game that came out many years ago. Kind of has this like cartoony kind of vibrant art style to it, and it's kind of a mixed bag in my opinion. The game, when you look at it at first glance, isn't much to look at visually. I have a feeling that the studio did this because of their inspiration from MOBAs and things like that, and I think MOBA players will find themselves right at home in this art style. I kind of wish the graphics were a bit better, the animations were a bit cleaner. Obviously, again, this is still alpha, so there's time to polish up these things. But I think the major upside to this is that you can tell by looking at it that it'll probably run on a wide variety of PCs. This game is coming to Steam and Arc. It doesn't currently have any plans for console launch. I don't know if the game is successful on PC. Maybe they will have a console launch down the road. I don't know what their plans are. They didn't say this, but one could suspect that that might be the case if that happens. So I think this game will run on a wide variety of PCs because it doesn't look too graphically intensive, and I know that's a major concern for players these days. What's the performance of the game like? The game played absolutely fine, so that shouldn't be an issue for most players. And some of the other things I talked about with the development team about this game are social elements in the game, whether there would be guilds or clans, whether there's going to be a trade function or auction hall, whether there'll be dueling, stuff like that. And generally, these sort of questions were met with a very similar answer, which is that the core focus of Fellowship and the development team on Fellowship is to make the gameplay loop fantastic. They're trying to work on really making you enjoy the gameplay experience, and they don't have a huge development team, so those sort of features while they say they really want to put them into the game, are not likely to be in the game at launch next year, but they will probably be added down the road as time allows because they're prioritizing the gameplay elements, and kind of all that other stuff is secondary, which I love to hear because a game without good gameplay isn't really worth playing, is it? So I'm glad to hear that they are aware of these things, that they absolutely want them in their game, and also that they're prioritizing the most important thing, which is making the gameplay experience fantastic. And I really love how old school the game feels too. I mean, you have an ability bar where you're going to have up to 16 abilities and an ultimate ability, so 17 abilities per hero as you level the character up. And that's really going to allow you a lot of, skill rotation, finding the best rotation for the build that you have. Things that you would see in old school MMOs. I really like that cooldown based combat that we used to have. It's a bit of a weird turn from modern day action. A lot of games have gone the real time route where, everything is reflex oriented, stamina based. This game is kind of a throwback where you're managing your cooldowns in the right order and your resources in the right order to keep your rotation up. I really like that. And honestly, I just had a ton of fun playing. And one more thing before I wrap up this video, there is a closed alpha that kicks off tomorrow that runs for 5 days. If you want to try out the game, you can sign up on their website and hopefully get into that and check out the game for free and see what it's all about. They did say that there would be more betas and play tests as they get closer to launch next year. So if you don't somehow get into that, no fear, you might be able to get into another one later this year or maybe early next year. So keep an eye out for that. But I really want to know what you guys think. Is this something you guys are interested in? Did you guys play old school MMOs like I did and you kind of missed those days and you would really enjoy a game? Maybe you didn't know you would enjoy it, but you would enjoy a game where you can get that experience without having to do the whole questing grind for 50 plus hours before you get to the dungeons and endgame. Let me know in the comments.